After years of speculation, the Switch 2 has finally been announced. As someone who spent the last 2 years refusing to upgrade my dying Switch because I've been waiting for the Switch 2, I'm personally very happy about this. But what does this mean for the Pokémon franchise, and particularly for VGC? We don't even have a release date for the Switch 2 yet, just an announcement of a Nintendo Direct happening in April, so we can't say anything for certain, but I have a theory about release timelines based on past releases for Nintendo's games and consoles.
Disclaimer.
Before we dive into this topic, note that everything in this video is purely speculation and nothing is confirmed yet. This is just what I think is the most likely scenario. Feel free to let me know your own thoughts in the comments. The first thing to put on our timeline is the Switch 2's release date, which I expect to be in November of this year, although it could potentially be a month or two before that. Let's have a look at the release dates of all of Nintendo's new generation consoles, by which I mean brand new consoles rather than new versions of existing ones. For example, the DS counts, the DSi and DS Lite don't since they're just updates to the DS, but the 3DS counts since 3DS games are exclusive to that console and can't be played on the DS. Further to that, the 2DS and the 3DS XL are just versions of the 3DS, which is different to the regular DS and DS Lite and DS.
Okay, anyways, coming from Nintendo, new Nintendo 23DS Lite featuring Dante from the Devil May Cry series XL, and Knuckles.
You following so far? Going back as far as the release of the GameCube back in 2001, all of these new generation consoles have been released in either March or November. Obviously the Switch 2 won't be a March release, so November seems the most likely. The first Switch reveal trailer to mention a release date was around 4.5 months before the Switch's release, so assuming we get a release date in the April Direct, the Switch 2 could release as early as September. From a business standpoint though, November makes more sense so Nintendo can time the release with the surge in sales before Christmas. I think it's also very likely that we see the Generation 10 Pokémon games released in November. Ever since the release of Pokémon X and Y back in 2013, a new generation has been released every 3 years in November, and I see no reason why that would change this year. Especially if the Switch 2 is released this year, having a brand new Pokémon generation as a release title would be excellent for sales from Nintendo's perspective. The timeline of VGC over the course of Scarlet and Violet's lifespan points towards a 2025 release for Gen 10 too. In the past, these 3-year cycles in each game have seen 1 year with a regional Pokédex format, meaning a limited Pokédex made up solely of Pokémon obtainable in the base game of each generation, then 1 year with a national Pokédex format, an expanded Pokédex including all the Pokémon available in the game, including through transfers, and then a final year in a restricted format. Historically, these have been formats where you can use 2 restricted legendary Pokémon on your team. If you're not sure what a restricted legendary is, I've put a link in the description to a page that explains it. This pattern has been broken in Scarlet and Violet, with no regional Pokédex format being played at the World Championships. The first World Championships in Scarlet and Violet back in 2023 were in a national Pokédex format, with Pokémon transferable through Pokémon Home such as Urshifu and Landorus available. In fact, 2023 Worlds was the first ever tournament in this format, but that's a whole other topic of conversation. The second World Championships in Scarlet and Violet were in a single restricted format, which is a format that we've never seen at a World Championships before. Most people are assuming that 2025 Worlds will be in a double restricted format, but then there's not really anywhere to go from there except backwards. To me, this is a strong indicator that we'll be getting new games this year. The Pokémon Company will have known about their Gen 10 release schedule well in advance, and they'd have no reason to rush past the regional dex formats if they weren't planning on the usual 3-year cycle. I've heard a few people being skeptical about this November release for a couple of reasons. The first is that we've not heard anything about Gen 10 yet, and surely we'd have heard about it by now if it were released this year. You only need to go back to the release of Scarlet and Violet to debunk this one. The initial reveal trailer for those games debuted on the 27th of February 2022, the year of their release. Since it's currently January, which is indeed before February, I don't think the silence is cause for concern just yet. The other point people have made is that Pokémon Legends ZA is releasing sometime in 2025, and Nintendo wouldn't want to release 2 Pokémon games in the same year. Again, we only need to look at 2022. Pokémon Legends Arceus was released in January 2022, the same year as Scarlet and Violet. Of course, it's unlikely we'll be getting Legends ZA for a few months yet, but I'm confident that it will be released in the first half of the year. It was confirmed in the trailer for Legends ZA that it'll be releasing on the Switch, and I don't think Nintendo would want to release it for the Switch at the same time as the Switch 2 is released. Naturally, this release will be closer to Generation 10 than Legends Arceus was to Scarlet and Violet, but the point here is that it's not unprecedented for Nintendo to release 2 major Pokémon titles in the same year. There's also one final piece of information regarding the World Championships that I didn't mention earlier that implies to me that we'll be getting Generation 10 this year, but this info comes from a leak and is far from confirmed for now. This leak describes the 2026 debut of Project Mistral, which is in essence a public event to be held at the same time and in the same general location as the World Championships, but as its own distinct event with different themes. The World Championships would be for the players, with art and themes focused around esports, and Project Mistral would be for the general public, with art and themes based on the location that Worlds is being hosted in, much like all the artwork we've seen for previous World Championships. So what does this have to do with Generation 10? Well, the details of this project suggest that the Pokémon Company are looking to push VGC as an esport, and to revamp the entire structure of the World Championships. It seems to me like tying this in with a new generation of Pokémon games makes the most sense, where excitement for the game is at its highest. And if this is going to be done in the 2026 World Championships, well then that means that Gen 10's got to be here pretty soon. We've established why I think a Gen 10 release in November of this year is likely, but what does that mean for VGC? I imagine it'll be much the same as in previous generations. VGC will continue on Scarlet and Violet for a few months after the 2025 World Championships, most likely in the same format as Worlds, and then we'll move over to Generation 10 shortly after the new games come out. We'll most likely start Generation 10 with a regional Pokédex format, where we'll be able to test out and explore all the new Pokémon these games will bring. As a VGC player, I absolutely love this part of the format, where people are trying to work out how good all the new Pokémon are, how older Pokémon fit into the metagame, what archetypes and Pokémon combinations are going to be especially strong. I'm getting excited just talking about it. So, to recap what I think the timeline will look like for Pokémon games, we're looking at Legends EA releasing at some point in the first half of the year. I'd guess around April or June, but it's very hard to say. That's then followed by the release of the Switch 2 at some point between September and November, but I'd guess most likely November. Then, finally, we have Generation 10 dropping in November, possibly as a release title for the Switch 2, and with it, VGC will move from Scarlet and Violet to these new games. This one I'm very confident about, but I could still be wrong, and only time will tell. For now, we'll just have to wait until April to find out more, and I for one can't wait. And that's my take on what Switch 2's release means for Generation 10 and for VGC. Do you think I'm right? Or do you think we won't see another main series game until next year? Let me know in the comments. As always, if you enjoyed, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and check out my other videos for more competitive Pokemon content. To keep up with my live content, go follow me on Twitch. The link to that is in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.